The Fountain Theater is one of the most special shamanic theaters, I'm going to call that. It is the oracle. It is a small, intimate theater that invites you into their world, that you are forever transformed in the story that they're telling. No one walks in there and comes out going, it was all right. Oh, it's okay. Every time you go see a piece of theater at the Fountain, you can drive by on the Fountain Street and see a throng of theater goers on the sidewalk discussing. So the work that they do, the conversation continues once they leave the theater. When did I first fall in love with theater and fall in love with the theater world? Indirectly, I fell in love, I'll reframe it and say I fell in love with story and storytelling, which was a direct result of my mother, who was an educator. And I was exposed to stories, fables, classics, the age of 5 on up. I was opposite of you. I was an early reader. I devoured story. And when I was like in junior high school in a creative writing class, what would happen was I got A's in content and got C's, D's, and F's in punctuation because I would write in stream of consciousness. And but also my mother said, if they ever find out, because your head is full of stories, I would mash stories and create my own stories. So basically my foundation was story and storytelling. When I got on restriction when I was a little kid, I would ask my mother to take me to the library. And so I would go to the library and I get these piles of books. And I would be in there. So it didn't matter if you said I couldn't do this, I couldn't go outside, because I would immerse myself in the world of story. And then subsequently, because I was very active, I was in everything. She put me in anything that would take that energy. So it was tap, ballet, going to theater, all of those things that I was just, this is what we're doing. This is our outing for today. Because she was an educator, I knew that I had to go to school. There was no ifs, ands, buts about it. It was like, you will get your degree, because she was a proponent of education. Okay. So I knew I was going to get a degree. I didn't know in what. But I ended up, when I went to school, going into creative writing. That's what I thought I was going to do. But then my first year of college, now remember, I was already exposed to theater, opera, music, all of that. So when I got to college, a friend of mine ran across the campus. And he said, Shirley, Joe, what are you doing? What are you doing? I said, I'm going to class. And he said, well, they're doing a show in the theater arts department and they don't have any Black women. And I said, I knew somebody that could do this role. I said, I don't act. And he said to me, Shirley Joe, you're so full of BS, you would be perfect. So I said, being the person I am, I'm like, if there's a door, and I haven't been in that door, my curiosity would take me through that door. And so I said yes. And I said yes. I went through the whole process and the journey of now manifesting physically the story. And I loved it, but I had to keep it a secret from my mother because I was supposed to do something that was normal in writing. And so it was a year before she knew that I had changed my major to theater. So that, I think, is a roundabout way of giving you backstory of how I started loving story in an indirect way. And that I then went to UCLA, got my MFA in theater. Then worked as an actress. I didn't get my MFA in directing. That was something that was not in my head. So I acted for years and years and years. And then somewhere in that journey, I got really frustrated with the industry as far as being an actor, because as an actor, you are limited because you're usually into your story, your character. And so in that frustration, when I was at UCLA, people would say to me, oh, we need a director, or we did, and I would just do that, saying, oh, okay, I'll do it. The film department was next to the theater department at UCLA. And so when I was finished with all my classes, I went over there and took film and television classes. So my curiosity, and I didn't even think that's what I was getting into. Fast forward, a friend of mine asked me to, he said, if I survive this heart attack, he was a poet and he had papers full of poetry, I want to do a one-man show. So I said yes. I took his work, created a story, and augmented his piece with 5 actors, and we did it a cappella, and I created a piece called Impressions of a Loud Reader. After I had gone to the different theaters in Los Angeles, but it was like, you're an actress, who are you, whatever. But a friend of mine had a photographer studio, and he said, you can have my space when I close at 5. So then we did the Mickey Rooney, Judy Garland, here's the space, let's make a show. I produced it, I directed it, and I did something that they said you shouldn't do, and I financed it. But I now say that was an investment in my career. So then I started making the transition from actor to director. And the works that I was known for was doing original plays. So I would do new works and working with writers, which I also love that, the process of creating something and giving it shape and form. Why and when did I get involved with the Fountain Theater? I got involved with the Fountain Theater in 1997. And I had been doing a show with Indesha May Holland at the time, who wrote a piece called From the Mississippi Delta, which won awards and was going and being produced around the country. I got a phone call, and I had directed her piece in Minneapolis at the Illusion Theater and a couple other theaters. And I got a call from Stephen Sachs saying that she wanted me to direct the piece at the Fountain. And I had never heard of the Fountain. And he explained to me where it was located, the uniqueness of it, et cetera. And so that began my relationship with them. That's taken me up until today. I think altogether I've directed 10 productions with them over this span, and I have developed with Stephen. I helped develop Central Avenue. I helped develop Citizen by Claudia Rankin. I helped create and develop works, new works in the Fountain. One of the reasons why I like working at the Fountains to me and Stephen Sachs and Deborah Lawler have always been about doing works of social relevance around the world and dealing with different cultures and social issues. And he was doing that I will say I knew of 1997. So it's really interesting because more theaters like, oh, we've got to create and do profound works and getting diversity and productions and stories. Well, Stephen Sachs and the Fountain Theater and Deborah Lawler had been doing it. So, and it's genuine, it's authentic, and it's one of their mission statements. So I love working at the Fountain for the fact that when I go there, I feel safe. I go there and I know I'm doing and being supported with fellow colleagues of the same nature. Why is it important for theater to embrace, I'm going to say embrace, uh, the in total community in their storytelling, which they haven't done uh, to the, let's say, to they haven't done it to the fullness that they should. I feel theater is no different than we as human beings. So, and the work that's done in theater is just like when you were telling me your story before we started this interview. The theater tells stories, and this is what I learned years ago, is stories. The story is about us. Every story is about us, regardless of the theme. Storytelling from the time on, and this is such a cliche, but it's true, gives us something so that we can better understand who we are and how we navigate in the world. That's its function. Now, part of the function is you give you art, but I call it edutainment. The other part, since the time we were all in circle and the drum happened and they were saying, okay, and the shamans would come and they would give you story to tell you why the rain came from the sky or why the storm is happening. That's our job. And our job is to inform and elevate us as human spirit and human beings. So, that's one part. I also say, now follow me because I also talk in fragments and non sequiturs. In order to know a man, you must know his God. And I don't mean that literally, but in order to understand, and this is where we're glitching and not connecting, you must know the culture. To know a man's God is to know the culture. You must know the culture before you sit down at the table to communicate. Again, the job of the arts. What we have missed is to be able to know the man, the culture. If we understood the culture, then there would be no fear in your fellow man because there would be understanding. And the mission, and that's one of the missions, I said there's a lot, but that's what our function is, as I call myth makers, people in theater, myth makers, that's our function. So a roundabout way again of saying, for me, you see it's passion, that's the importance. Because we want to know what our wants, our needs, and I always say, like when I teach or when I'm working in a piece, the three basic needs of man is to feel safe, to be nurtured, to be seen. And if we don't get one of those, we'll act out in behavior, which most of our stories will tell us. When did I first hear about Emmett Till, and why did I want to direct it? Okay, here's a roundabout backstory to that. Because of my association with the Fountain Theater, and I knew Ifa Bayeza, the writer, when I was working on the East Coast. I was invited when she was writing it to come to a Fountain Theater for a reading. And Ben Bradley, who's now deceased, created the space for Ifa to come and do that reading so we could all hear it. I remember sitting in the audience, and at that time, the play was focused more on Emmett and his mother, the trial. So she had a 3-part linear play about Emmett. But the scene that she was working on that I was listening to was the scene with Emmett and his mother. And I found that fascinating because usually when people approach or talk about Emmett Till, it is about the greater drama of him going down there, the killing, the murder, the funeral, bye. But we never really see him. You see him as this iconic martyr, but you never really see him as a mother's son, the human being. And it fascinated me. I remember after the reading, I went to her and I said, oh my goodness, I love this. This should, to me, I was like, this is the play. This should be the play. So done. And I just went, oh, I want to do this. There was a part where this play is so good. It has to be done. I would love to do it, but as life is, everybody's gone their separate ways. She ended up doing it, the linear version, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, at the Goodman Theater, and it was directed at that time by Scott. And it was, of course, lauded and applauded and got great reviews. And then I forgot about it. Then I think a couple of years after that, and this is an indirect way, see, it's an indirect way. I had just finished coming from Avatar, the movie. And I was like, that movie was so good, yay! And I'm driving down the freeway 405. And I get a call from Stephen Sachs, and he asked me, what are you doing? And I said, I'm driving, and I'm starting to go, yakety yak, as now you can tell that I do. I just finished seeing Avatar. You got to go see. And he says, Shirley Joe, are you driving? I go, yeah. And he said, pull over. And he informed me that the director, the original director that was on board, that they had 3 rehearsals. It was cast, design team, was Ben Bradley, who had created the space for Ifa to do the reading. He now was going to do her new, her new presentation, 5-person. It's a choral poem play, and he said that Ben had been murdered tragically, and that would I come in and then shepherd the play. And so what is very interesting about life, and I said, of course, first I said, I have to, read the script, and I read the script, and then I'm like, oh, and then, you're mourning someone and then you're going into a space where these actors, these 5 actors, had been, working with their director, who was now tragically not in their world anymore. What was very interesting about the genesis of that for me is I'm going into space where there's a trauma that just happened, doing a show where a trauma had happened. And so it was all in your cellular structure or mind, and then with the actors as we are presenting this piece. And I think it transcended and it resonated because you couldn't lie. First, you couldn't lie, but then you really couldn't lie because emotionally, your psyche and was affected the way Emmett's family was affected. Emmett's mother was affected. So, going on a table read, it was not usually when you go into the theater and you're doing a table read, you're there and you're researching and you're talking and you're doing all. But here, it was real life meets in those very, I call it perfect storm experiences. And so this cast, that cast, which is this cast, had a very unique and special experience that we all we tethered to one another. That relationship with all of us, it's been 10 years since that experience happened. But you would never know that these people have been separated and hadn't seen each other, because this common experience we became very tight-knit as a family. And so the assemblage and I love Stephen for doing this. He has a unique way, has always had a way of being touched with what pieces that he picks for a season. And then for my last two experiences with him, with Citizen and now this, you know, we developed Citizen together that was all over the country. At the time, 5 years ago, it seemed like every week there was a young Black man being shot or young women. So we're doing a piece about what is it, the Citizen, the micro and macro aggressions. But unlike a usual play, you know, you could be in the theater, do your show, go home, take off. You could go to the bar and talk to friends, but we would be in that world of micro, macro aggressions, walk out the door of the theater and being confronted with it. So that was another one where you're like, that you couldn't separate what you were doing and presenting from what was going on. And same thing with Emmett. But again, last month with the killing of George Aubrey, and they were doing the memorials for him. Stephen wanted us to present Citizen in that time. And it is timeless. Like the piece Emmett is timeless. You would think, wait a minute, that happened in 1955. Do you mean, yes, 1955, those same themes, the same social discord is happening right now in 2020. The same thing. And so again, it is ripe. When he called us, 2 weeks was, I'm going to say last week, because we're putting this together. And he said, I want to do this on the weekend of the 65th anniversary of the death of Emmett Till, and also the new march on Washington. And I went, there he goes again. It's like, it's so timely. And it's like reading a book when you're young and you read it and then you get something out of it. And then when you read it as you grow older, Alice in Wonderland is a perfect example. Alice in Wonderland, when your kid is, oh, this is a good story. And then when you read Alice in Wonderland as an adult, you went, oh my gosh. And that's the same thing, is that every time, you know, taking this piece now, how it will land for a new generation. Not my grandmother's generation, who was in 1950, but this generation, how this story still lands for us. Emmett Till was 14 years old and was from Chicago, Illinois, and was raised by a single parent, Mamie Mobley. And he was a sassy, full of life, embraced life, loving young man. And it was the time of his coming of age. And one summer, his family was from Mississippi, a portion of the family. His mother and her people were part of that migration, the Great Migration that went up in the industrial world to Chicago. A lot of people right now used to call Chicago, and they may still do, call Chicago Mississippi North because of the migration. Many people left Mississippi and migrated there. Okay, so that's how she got there. Well, her family, a part of her family, Mobley, still lived there and came up to Chicago and to visit. And in that particular visit, Emmett wanted to go down south. And his mother was, oh, no, you will not go down south. Because she knew he had never been down south. He didn't know the rules or the way of life or, of the South. And so she said, no. And Uncle Mo said, well, he should come down there. I need an extra hand in picking the cotton. And she fought him going, but then Uncle Mo said, yes. And so he did. But before he left, she was saying, Emmett, when you go down there, you cannot act the way you do here in Chicago. It is not as free. You know what I'm saying? You can't look him in the eye. So she gave him the rules. You cannot look him in the eye. You can't do for the survival rules. And so he went down there with he and his cousins. And then one day they went into Money, Mississippi, to the Bryant Market. So he went into the town where Bryant Market was, and he went into the store to buy candy. And the other thing, there was a rule there that, when Black people would go into the stores, you could not touch. You'd either have to put the money on the counter because you didn't want any contact. So that was part of the rules. He ended up paying for the for the food, and he gave her the money in her hand. And there's a line in there, he said, he put the money in her hand. They're like, the kids were like, oh my God, he put the money in her hand. So he did. That was rule number 1 broken. And one of the things I did not mention, he stuttered. He had a speech impediment. And in that speech impediment, how some people use the inhalation in the breath, but sometimes what we thought was, it probably was not so much that he whistled, but in his impediment, as he was talking, the whistle came. And of course, that's how he whistled at a white woman. And when that happened, she lost it. They had to run out of town, and the word got that he had whistled at this white woman. She told her husband. The husband and his brother went to the house a week later. It took them a week to come to Uncle Moses' house in the country. And they took Emmett out of the house. And they said to Mose was a preacher, his uncle was a preacher. They said, we're just going in there, we're just going to talk to him, and so it's like, we're going to teach him a lesson. But they took him to the barn, they tortured him, they shot him, and then after they killed him and murdered him, they wrapped a cotton gin, which is a big metal tire, it looks like a tire rim, around his neck, and drowned him in the river. And what was very interesting about it, that cotton gin was supposed to keep him down, but his body floated up. And it was up, and it's so it's so spiritual in a way. And so they told her, oh, you don't want to really see him. We'll keep him here. We'll bury him down here. And she said, absolutely not. I don't care what condition he is. You're going to bring my baby back to Chicago. And then that's when you see the photos of him, not only what the water damage had done, but his face, how his eye was hanging, and just how they had mutilated him. And they said you could smell, before you even entered the funeral, Paul, you could smell it. And they wanted a closed casket, and she said, no, I want the world to know what happened to my son. So that's what happened. But in the meantime, they had a trial in Sumner, Mississippi, of the 2 white men, and the Carolyn Bryant, who was the one who said, he whistled at me, and that had created this. And of course, they were acquitted. Now, what's interesting, in 2017, Carolyn Bryant, who was the one who said he whistled at me, he's the one who did it, who pointed him out, before she died, confessed that she lied. We went in our process, in this unique process of putting the show together. There were tears, there was lots of laughter and camaraderie. When I'll tell you, here's a picture that tells you how I feel about the actors who I worked with 10 years ago. After we rehearsed and ran, I think we ran for 5 months. It was critically acclaimed. It got all these awards. But after we finally finished, one of the actresses worked at Disneyland. And so we all, the cast, the stage manager, and myself, we all went to Disneyland. And there you are, all the 60-year-old kids that lived inside of us went to Disneyland. And that can tell you in a nutshell how we felt about each other. So when we came back together in this Zoom format, there was the laughter, and there was the ribbing, and there was the signifying, and it brought me so much joy that I just started welling up and go, I love these people. These people have heart. They're generous. They're creative. They're talented. I love these people. So that's how I felt. What do I want the audience to get out of this play? Life. That in this journey we take with Emmett Till, it is the coming of age for all of us, and however you want to interpret that. Emmett was 14, like I said, full of life. His world was before him. He had these dreams that a 14-year-old would have. And he was surrounded with people who loved him. And his life he was right there. And with the tragedy of a young life cut short. But I always say your life lived is an example for all. Emmett's life lived became an example for all of us, that instead of falling, going into a fetal position and thinking the world is dark with man's inhumanity to man, that it's Maya Angelou says it in her poem, and they say it in this piece. And still I rise. So you don't let it pull you down, break you. That's it. You don't let it break you. But if the cycle of life lived is the joy, is the joy. So I think when you see it, you go through the gamut of human emotion. But at the end of it, yes, it is heart-wrenching, but it becomes a mother's love. And because of the mother's love, that becomes an example for other mothers and families and children to continue. Because his death became the rallying cry for the civil rights movement, for the awareness, because again, there's the life, the awareness exploded and say, no mas, no mas, no mas. Something must be done. We have got to, back to being seen, we have got to look at each other. We have got to heal each other, right? And it's in increments where we are right now. And I call part of the thing is we are in a perfect storm. The pandemic, being locked down for that long period of time, forced people to, it was deconstructing us. And the things that you thought when you, remember I said, to be seen, to be safe, to be nurtured, that thing that you thought you were safe in your bubble, all of a sudden through something invisible shattered what your reality was. Then, and people are like getting cabin fever, then fear because you have an unknown that is, coming at you, and you can't grasp anything to hold on to. Then, then George's death, and then you get to witness it. It's not like, oh, that's a news cycle, or I can see that because I'm going to go play baseball. I'm going over here because, when you could deflect. But because we were here in this square, everybody witnessed man's inhumanity to man for 9 minutes. That's just like back in the day when the Vietnam War was going on. We were okay until they started televising, and the body bags were coming from those planes, and they were televising the Vietnam War. That was like a spark that goes, no mas, no mas, and the demonstrations on top of the turmoil and all of that Pandora's box that was happening then. Is the same kind of, when you're witnessing something and you can't deflect it. So by the time they said you can go and go outside now, the perfect storm was there. People were out. People had to unleash and express all of this that was being suppressed all of that time. We're at a time of awareness, We're at a time where ignorance is not bliss. And so those many ways that we can recall the soul and our humanity is important for us through here, for our sanity, for our spirit. I just want people to come and share this journey with these very special people that the Found Theater is sharing. And so that we are all a part of this unique time of our nation's healing, of our healing. So I invite you, to come share that experience with us.